Good evening and welcome to News of the World. It's Friday, August 14th. Tonight we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Australia to Belize. There's nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to be. Settle in and let the world turn. In Australia, two of the country's most familiar financial names, Macquarie and Westpac, have been called to give testimony in a parliamentary probe examining the audit practices of KPMG, one of the big four accounting firms operating there. The inquiry touches on questions that matter to anyone who relies on the honesty of corporate numbers, which is to say, everyone. Auditors are meant to be the quiet guarantors that a company's books tell the truth, and when confidence in that process frays, the damage can spread quietly through an entire economy. The details of what exactly went wrong inside KPMG Australia are still being assembled piece by piece in hearings where lawmakers are trying to understand whether the firm's work met the standard the public has a right to expect. Macquarie, the investment bank Australians sometimes call the millionaire's factory, and Westpac, one of the oldest banks in the country, are now part of that conversation, asked to share what they saw from the other side of the table as clients. It's the kind of story that doesn't make a loud sound. There are no sirens, no sudden market crashes. But in a country where retirement savings and mortgage rates and small business loans all thread through the same financial system, the integrity of an audit is not an abstract thing. It sits underneath daily life like a foundation you don't think about until a crack appears. And in Australia this week, they are looking closely at the cracks. The Netherlands is a place shaped by water, by the sea it held back, the canals it cut, the polders it drained into farmland. So when the news turns to drought there, it carries a particular kind of weight. These days, across the Netherlands and much of Europe, the rain is falling short. Crops are suffering despite everything farmers know, everything they've adapted. Fields that ought to be green this time of year are quieter than they should be. The soil pulling away at the edges for a country that spent centuries managing too much water. The absence of it feels almost foreign, a problem from a different direction. The Dutch have always been engineers of their own landscape, building systems that move water where it needs to go. But drought asks something different. It asks for restraint, for patience, for a kind of attention that doesn't come naturally to a culture built on control. And it's not just the Netherlands. Across the continent, farmers are watching the same sky and finding the same silence. The land they know is still there, but the rhythm it keeps is shifting, season by season, in ways no one quite expected. If you're still with me, you might picture those flat Dutch fields under a pale sky, the canals lower than they should be, the farmers waiting, not for a dramatic storm, just for the ordinary rain that used to come on its own. It's a small thing to ask for. Lately, it's been a lot. Saudi Arabia finds itself at the center of a conversation that stretches from Ankara to Islamabad. Turkey has laid out plans for a defense pact, a framework, really, of mechanisms and understandings that would bring together three nations with deep historical ties and shared interests in a changing region. The details remain quiet for now, but the shape of it is clear enough. Three countries, each powerful in its own right, looking toward one another and asking what stability might look like if they built it together. Some observers have called it a sign that the old order in the Middle East, the one anchored for decades by a single superpower, is giving way to something more plural, more locally drawn. Saudi Arabia's crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has also been speaking with the head of U.S. Central Command about defense ties and about lowering regional temperatures. So the kingdom is not turning away from old partners. It seems rather to be widening the circle, adding new conversations alongside the familiar ones, hedging its bets in a part of the world where that has always been wisdom. There's something steadying about watching a country refuse to choose simplicity over security. If you are still with me, you might sit with that image for a moment, a kingdom standing at a crossroads, not rushing. just considering which roads might lead somewhere worth going. And somewhere in Riyadh, the talks continue, quietly, under the kind of night sky that holds more stars than you might expect. St. Lucia, like several of its Caribbean neighbors, runs a citizenship by investment program, a system where foreign nationals can acquire citizenship in exchange for a qualifying financial contribution to the country. These programs matter. For small island nations, they represent a meaningful source of public revenue, helping fund infrastructure, national development, and the everyday services that keep a country steady. This year, the program's intake has nearly halved compared to the previous cycle, fewer applications coming through the door. But here's what makes the story worth holding on to. The number of decisions made has more than doubled. So while fewer people applied, the team behind the program worked through a substantial portion of what was already on their desks. There's something quietly reassuring about that, a backlog being cleared. Files being opened, reviewed, answered. It suggests a system catching up with itself, finding its rhythm again. For a country of roughly 180,000 people, managing a program like this is no small administrative feat. Every application carries weight, every decision carries consequence. And in the broader Caribbean conversation about transparency and due diligence across citizenship programs, St. Lucia appears to be doing the unglamorous work of processing with care. The numbers will settle where they settle. But for now, the picture is one of a small nation tending to its own house, one decision at a time, while the sea outside carries on as it always has. Chile has been moving hundreds of inmates into a new prison, part of a broader security push under President Cast. It's the kind of story that can sound purely administrative, a transfer, a building, a policy, but in a country that has been wrestling with questions of crime, safety, and what justice should look like, these movements carry real weight. Families on both sides of the prison walls feel a shift like this. A new facility means new distances, new routines, new uncertainty. President Cast has made security a central theme of his approach to governance, and this transfer is one concrete expression of that priority. We don't have the details of the prison itself, where it sits, how it's built, what life inside it looks like. But the fact that hundreds of people are being moved tells you it's a substantial operation, planned and carried out with care, or at least with intention. Chile has long prided itself on stability, on being a country that works through its challenges with institutions rather than around them. A new prison is, in its own quiet way, part of that conversation about what a society owes to the people it locks up and to the people it's trying to protect. If you're still with me, you might sit with that for a moment. Not every story tonight will be easy, but each one is someone's life, rearranged. And in Chile this week, hundreds of lives are being rearranged, behind walls most of us will never see. Belgium has been doing something extraordinary out in the North Sea, and it's the kind of thing you don't notice from shore. Off the Belgian coast, workers have been lowering enormous concrete blocks into the water, 23 of them together, weighing some 22,000 metric tons. That's not a typo. These are vast, deliberate pieces of infrastructure, each one settled onto the seabed with extraordinary care. And the purpose is something you might call an outlet, in the most literal sense. Belgium's offshore wind farms generate tremendous amounts of electricity out there on the water, but getting that power to where people actually need it, to ports, to airports, to the places where industry and daily life hum along, that's the harder trick. So this giant structure built from those sunken blocks becomes a kind of collection point. It gathers the energy from the turbines and sends it onward, toward land, toward use. There's something quietly moving about the scale of it. 22,000 metric tons of concrete placed in the sea so that the wind can do what it does naturally and the power can travel somewhere it matters. If you're still with me, Picture that for a moment, these huge gray forms disappearing beneath the waves, and above them, the turbines turning slowly in the offshore wind. It's engineering on a scale that almost feels geological, and somewhere onshore, maybe, a light turns on because of it. Suriname sits on the northern shoulder of South America, where the Atlantic meets a coast of mangroves and mudflats, and where these days something is stirring far out beneath the sea. For years, the country has watched its neighbor Guyana strike oil in astonishing quantities just over the border. Now, Suriname's own offshore prospects are edging closer to reality. A project called Grand Morgu is advancing through the stages that separate a discovery from a producing field. The name alone, Grand Morgu, which in the local tongue means big worm, a nod to the stubborn creature that keeps moving forward, carries a certain folk confidence. Petronas, the Malaysian energy company, is involved, and new licensing rounds are opening more of Suriname's waters to exploration. The country isn't there yet. Commercial production still lies ahead, and the distance between finding oil and pumping it is measured in years, not months. But the momentum is real. For a nation of roughly 600,000 people, one of the smallest populations on the continent, the prospect of offshore wealth brings both hope and the quiet weight of questions that every petrostate must eventually face. How do you build institutions strong enough to hold what the sea gives up? How do you make sure the benefits reach inland, past Paramaribo, into the forests and river communities where life has always followed its own rhythm? Suriname has time to think about those things. The rigs are out there, the plans are moving, and the coast is waiting. If you're still with me, we'll let that settle and move along. In the Maldives, the ocean isn't scenery, it's the road. More than 1,000 islands spread across 26 atolls, and for most of modern memory, the way you get from one to another has been by boat, diesel engines thudding across warm lagoons. So there's something quietly significant about a $100 million experiment now unfolding there, asking whether electric hydrofoils, boats that lift above the water on slender wings, could replace the coastal transit people have relied on for decades. The idea is simple enough in principle. Lift the hull out of the water and you cut drag, which means less energy, which means a battery can carry you further. In a country where nearly every journey begins and ends at the water's edge, that matters. It matters for fuel costs, for noise, for the diesel sheen that collects in harbors. And it matters for a nation watching sea levels with a closeness few others can understand. The details are still taking shape: which routes, which vessels, how soon. But the ambition behind it is clear: to keep the Maldives moving without leaving so much behind in the water. If you've ever sat on the bow of a small boat in the early morning, watching an island shrink behind you and another one slowly rise ahead, you know how essential that passage is. It's not a luxury, it's the connective tissue of a whole country. And if these quiet lifting boats prove themselves there, in that heat and that salt and that light, it won't just be the Maldives watching. $100 million is a lot to spend on a question, but the answer could reach far beyond these atolls. Greece knows this season too well. On the island of Crete, a village is counting what the wildfires have taken: olive groves and orchards, perhaps a storeroom, perhaps a home. The details are still settling, the way ash settles, but the shape of the loss is already clear. Fires moved through forested hills and down toward the coast, close enough to beaches that tourists had to be taken off the sand by boat, ferried away over water that must have looked impossibly calm against the smoke above it. Further north, Croatia fought its own blaze the same week, and the whole eastern Mediterranean seemed to be holding its breath. Fire is not new here. Summers in Greece have long carried this threat, and the people who live through them have a kind of fluency with it. Not acceptance exactly, but a knowledge of what the wind can do, how fast a hillside can go. What stays with you is the image of that village afterward. people walking through charred ground, looking at what remains. A wall still standing, a tree that somehow didn't catch. The tourists will go home and tell the story, and the villagers will stay and start again the way they have before. If you're still with me, just hold that picture for a moment. The quiet after the fire and the people in it beginning to take stock. Kenya has approved a set of new air routes, and among them is something the country has never had before: a direct passenger link to Saudi Arabia. It's the kind of news that might not make a loud sound, but if you think about what a flight route really is, it's a bridge, a decision by two places to make themselves easier to reach. For Kenya, whose airlines already thread across Africa and out toward Europe and Asia, this opens one more corridor eastward, toward the Gulf, toward the Arabian Peninsula, toward a part of the world with which it has long had ties of trade and faith and labor, but not until now a straight line in the sky. The details of the routes are still taking shape: which carriers will fly them, how often, from which cities. What matters is the signal. Kenya is looking outward, and it's doing so in a way that suggests confidence that there are people on both ends who want to move between these places, whether for work, for family, for pilgrimage, or simply to see something new. If you've ever waited in an airport far from home and watched the board for your gate, you know the feeling that a single destination on a screen can change the shape of your day. Somewhere in Nairobi, and somewhere perhaps in Riyadh or Jeddah, someone is looking ahead to a flight that didn't exist before. And tonight, that possibility is quietly settling into the schedules. Malta sits in the middle of the Mediterranean, a small island nation surrounded by some of the richest waters in the region. Those waters have always sustained people here: fishing, diving, trade. This week, they also took something back. A diver died off the Maltese coast in what appears to have been a freak accident. Investigators believe the diver became entangled with a bluefin tuna, one of the most powerful fish in the sea, an animal that can weigh hundreds of kilos and move with astonishing force. The details remain limited, and the word May is doing important work in the reporting. What seems clear is that this was not a typical diving incident. It was the kind of thing that happens when humans and large wild animals share the same space, and something goes wrong in a way no one quite anticipated. Bluefin tuna are themselves a complicated story in the Mediterranean, overfished for decades, now slowly recovering under stricter quotas, still prized by markets around the world. Malta's tuna ranches are part of that economy, so the waters where this diver went in are waters where people and tuna cross paths more often than they once did. If you're still with me, you might sit with that for a moment. A person went into the sea, as people do every day around Malta, and did not come back. The investigation will tell us more in time. For now, there is a family grieving, and an island that knows its sea well enough to respect what it can do. Bahrain is a small island nation in the Persian Gulf, and for years it has been home to American military families stationed there. Children in schools, routines built, friendships rooted in the warm salt air along the Corniche. But some months ago, those families were evacuated. The details behind the decision sit in the space between military necessity and personal upheaval, and the sources we have don't fill in every corner. What we do know is what remains. These families, sailors, spouses, children, are still waiting. Their lives are on hold, uncertain whether they will return to Bahrain or be sent somewhere else entirely. Imagine packing a household in a hurry, telling a child their school year is over before it's over, and then sitting in a kind of suspension for months. No clear next posting, no date circled on a calendar. Just the quiet weight of not knowing. Bahrain itself, of course, goes on. The flour mills post their earnings. Basketball teams win their opening games. The oil traders at Vital's Bahrain office talk about risk and price. But underneath the ordinary rhythm of a place, there are people who left it suddenly and haven't been told when or whether they might come back. If you're still with me, hold that for a moment. The particular loneliness of being uprooted and then left to wait. It's not the loudest story in the world tonight, but it belongs to someone, and it's worth carrying into the dark. Costa Rica has long carried a reputation that most countries would envy, a place where the rainforest meets the road, where tourism and conservation seem to lean on each other like old friends. This week, that reputation is being affirmed once more as the country consolidates its standing as a world leader in ecotourism and safe destinations. It is not a loud claim. It rarely is. Here, Costa Rica's approach has always been quieter than that. A network of national parks, a commitment to renewable energy, a culture that treats biodiversity not as a luxury but as a birthright. Travelers come for the cloud forests, the surf breaks, the zipline cables strung through the canopy like threads of a larger conversation between people and land. And they keep coming back because the country has made them feel welcome without making the wildness feel diminished. Meanwhile, beneath the waves, Costa Rica's natural world is still revealing itself. On the deep-sea seamounts off its coast, scientists have found a new species of coral, a small star-shaped discovery that speaks to how much remains hidden in these waters. It is the kind of find that reminds you why a country protects what it has. You cannot know what is there and not feel some responsibility toward it, and so Costa Rica goes on, tending its forests and its reefs, welcoming visitors and quietly showing that safety and wonder are not separate things. They grow from the same soil. If you're still with me, let that sit for a moment. A country that treats its nature as home and its guests as neighbors. That is the story worth carrying tonight. Antigua and Barbuda is a nation of 2 islands, and most nights the quieter of the 2. Barbuda sleeps under wide skies and very little noise. It is the smaller island, the lower one, a place of pink sand and frigate birds and a few thousand people who have always lived close to the sea. For a long time, if you wanted to reach Barbuda from anywhere beyond Antigua, you came by boat or by small plane, and the journey itself told you something about the island's character, that it was not in a hurry to be found. These days, Barbuda has a new international airport, and on the 1st of November it will be given a new name. The airport is still young, still finding its place in the life of the island, and a renaming is a small but deliberate act, a community deciding what face to show the world when the world arrives. There is something tender about that. An airport on a small island is never just concrete and runways. It is a doorway, and whoever's name goes above it becomes part of the greeting. We don't yet know the name they will choose, but the choosing itself matters. It says that Barbuda is thinking about who it is now and who it wants to be, even as it opens itself a little wider. And if you're still with me, you might picture that runway at dusk, the light going soft over the flats, the frigate birds circling home, and a small island quietly making ready. In Togo these days, the parliament in Lomé has opened a new session, and the work before it is framed around 5 key reforms. That's really all we know from the dispatch. No detail yet on what each reform touches. But the fact that lawmakers are gathering with a clear, numbered agenda tells you something about how this small West African nation likes to move, deliberately, with the pieces laid out. Togo sits on a narrow strip of land between Ghana and Benin, with a southern coast on the Gulf of Guinea and a northern interior that reaches into the savannah. It's a country of about 8 million people, and its political life has often been shaped by patience rather than spectacle. So a parliamentary session built around reform, 5 of them, named and waiting, fits a certain rhythm the country knows well. What those reforms will become, once debate and amendment have done their work, is still ahead. For now, it's the opening. The doors are open, the agenda is set, and the conversation is just beginning. And in a country where so much of daily life, the markets, the festivals, the long traditions of the interior, carries on quite apart from what happens in government chambers, there's something steady about that. Lawmakers at their desks, a list in front of them, and the quiet understanding that the work of change, in Togo as anywhere, is slow, particular, and never quite finished. If you're still with me, we'll let that settle and move along. Cape Verde sits out in the Atlantic, 10 islands off the shoulder of West Africa, and these days the planes keep coming. More than 400,000 visitors arrived in the last quarter of 2025 alone, a number that for a nation of roughly 500,000 people means the islands are nearly doubling their own population with every busy season. The government has been investing in that flow. A state guarantee of about $5.5 million was approved to help the national airline, TACV, lease a Boeing 737-8, widening the runway, so to speak, between Cape Verde and the rest of the world. And the world has been finding its way there, not only for the beaches and the music and the slow warmth of island life, but for something unexpected. Cape Verde qualified for its first ever FIFA World Cup, landing in Group H alongside Spain, and in a match against Argentina, they came up just short, 3-2, leaving everything on the field. For a country this small, that kind of night doesn't happen quietly. People gathered to watch at home on the islands together. So the visitors keep arriving, and the islands keep arriving on the world stage in their own way, steady, proud, unhurried. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. 10 islands in the dark Atlantic, lit up with something close to wonder. In Argentina, money has always been a story people live inside of, not just something they spend. For years, the dollar has been both a lifeline and a fault line, something households and businesses reach for when the local currency feels uncertain. So when Argentina's economy minister announced that banks will ease dollar lending to companies, it carried more weight than a single policy shift might suggest. It means businesses that have struggled to borrow in dollars, to import materials, to plan beyond the next month, to simply keep their doors open, may find the path a little less narrow. Argentina has been working through a long and painful economic recalibration, with inflation that rose again in July, partly nudged by winter holiday spending. The monthly figure landed at 2.1%, a reminder that even when the trajectory feels steadier, the ground beneath is still shifting. Against that backdrop, opening up dollar lending is a signal, not of everything being fixed, but of a government trying to give companies room to breathe in a currency they trust. If you're still with me, it's worth sitting with what that means for an ordinary business owner in Buenos Aires or Mendoza, someone who has learned to plan carefully, to hedge, to hope quietly. A slightly easier loan in dollars won't rewrite the economy overnight. But it might let someone place an order they'd been postponing, or hold on to a few more workers through the season. In a country where economic news is rarely light, that kind of small relief has its own quiet weight. North Macedonia has been living with peace for 25 years now, and the question people are asking is a quiet one. Has reconciliation truly arrived? The Ohrid Agreement, signed all those years ago, brought an end to conflict between ethnic communities and laid out a framework for living together. It held, the shooting stopped. But the headlines these days suggest the deeper healing is still unfinished, that peace on paper and peace in the heart of a country are not always the same thing. There are journalists facing threats, there are political figures facing indictments, there are tensions with neighbors that flare and settle and flare again. And yet, if you look closely, there are other things happening too. At an ancient theater, Greek musicians crossed a border that was once bitterly contested, and they played their music and people listened together. That is not nothing. A country that can share a stage with a former adversary is a country doing something difficult and worthwhile. North Macedonia has also been sending power transformers to communities in Ukraine, to Kharkiv, to Zaporizhzhia, places that know what it means when the lights go out, a small country reaching toward others in need. 25 years of peace is not a small thing. It is fragile and hard-won and still in many ways incomplete, but it is there. And the people who live inside it are still deciding, day by day, what it will become. Eswatini, the small landlocked kingdom tucked between South Africa and Mozambique, is quietly adding something new to its landscape. A company called Innovent has launched the construction of a 10-megawatt solar power plant there, a modest project by global standards, but a meaningful one for a country of just over 1 million people. Eswatini has long depended on imported electricity to meet its needs, buying the bulk of its power from South Africa's grid. That arrangement works, more or less, but it leaves the kingdom exposed whenever supply tightens or prices rise across the border. So a homegrown source of energy, sunlight converted to current, on Eswatini's own soil, carries a weight that goes beyond the numbers. 10 megawatts won't transform the national grid overnight, but it's a foundation, a first sturdy step toward generating more of what the country consumes from its own sky. And in a place where drought has been a recurring worry in recent years, the shift towards solar carries an unspoken logic. The same sun that parches the land can also power it. Construction has begun, which means there are workers on a site now, clearing ground, setting frames, beginning the slow work of turning plans into something you can stand beside. If you're still with me, picture that. A field that will soon catch the light a little differently, panels tilting toward the same African sun that has always been there, now being asked to do one more thing. It's the kind of story that doesn't shout, but it holds. Singapore is a city that has built itself into one of the world's great financial centers, a place where capital moves freely, where banks and traders and insurers cluster along the waterfront, where the machinery of global finance hums with remarkable efficiency. And yet there's a question that lingers, the kind that surfaces quietly in business pages rather than in headlines. Can Singapore build a proper stock market of its own? It sounds like a strange question for a place so prosperous, but the puzzle is real. Companies that grow here often list elsewhere in Hong Kong, in New York, closer to where the deepest pools of investors wait. The exchange exists, of course, it functions, but it has never quite become the gravitational center that a city of this standing might expect. There is no single reason. It is something more like a slow tide, the weight of habit, the pull of larger markets nearby, the simple fact that capital, like water, finds the deepest channel. And Singapore, for all its discipline, has found that some channels are harder to dig than others. If you're still with me, you might sense the shape of the thing. Not a crisis, not a failure, but a patient ambition. A country that has succeeded at so much, still asking itself what kind of market it wants to be, and whether the answer is worth the wait. It is a question that does not need resolving tonight. Only the asking, steady and unhurried, the way this city tends to do its thinking. Mongolia knows something about dry land. It always has. The steppe stretches to every horizon, and the people who live on it have spent centuries reading the sky, moving their herds, making a life where the rain is never promised. So there's a certain rightness to the news that Mongolia will soon host COP17, the world's gathering on desertification and the slow drying of once living ground. Saudi Arabia currently holds the presidency of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, and the handover to Mongolia means the conversation moves to a country that doesn't need to imagine what it's about. Roughly a third of the world's land surface is degrading, turning to dust where crops and roots once held. It's not a distant problem. It's wheat fields in West Africa, rangeland in Central Asia, villages watching their soil leave with the wind. Whether COP17 brings relief is an open question and an honest one. These gatherings rarely move fast enough for the people closest to the dust. But there's something steadying about the summit landing here, in a nation where herders still watch the grass come back, or not, each spring, and where the bond between land and life is not a metaphor but a daily reckoning. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A wide open country under a big sky, preparing to welcome the world's attention to the ground beneath all our feet, and then we move on. Angola sits on the southwestern shoulder of Africa, a country of Atlantic coastline and inland plateaus, of oil wealth and hard-won peace after decades of civil war that ended only in 2002. Its politics have long been dominated by the ruling MPLA party, but UNITA, the former rebel movement turned opposition party, has remained a persistent voice, and these days, a growing one. This week, Angola's parliament took a quiet but meaningful step. It elected 4 UNITA members to sit on the National Electoral Commission, the body that oversees how the country votes. It is the kind of institutional move that can sound dry from a distance, names added to a commission, seats filled. But in a country where the distance between opposition and the levers of state has often been wide, it carries real weight. The commission is where trust in elections is either built or eroded. Having UNITA members inside it means the main opposition party will have eyes and hands on the process itself, not just voices outside it. This comes at a time of some tension. European political groups have recently raised concerns about a crackdown on UNITA activists, a reminder that Angola's democratic path is still being negotiated, still finding its footing. But the seating of these 4 members suggests that at least some of that negotiation is happening through institutions rather than around them. And for Angolans who remember the long years of war, the fact that former adversaries now sit across tables rather than across battle lines is not nothing. It is, in its quiet way, something worth holding on to as the night settles in. Estonia sits on the eastern edge of the European Union, a small country with a long memory for what it means to live next to something vast and unpredictable. This week, that position brought a quiet but significant development. Estonia has received its first payment under the EU's Safe Defence Instrument, just over €351 million, the first tranche of a broader €2.3 billion defence investment program. The money is meant to move quickly. It will go towards strengthening Estonia's armed forces and modernizing equipment along the EU's eastern flank, where the country has watched the war in Ukraine with an immediacy few other member states can fully share. For Estonia, defense spending is not an abstract debate, it is a line item tied to geography and to history. The country has consistently ranked among NATO's top spenders by percentage of GDP, and this new EU funding accelerates plans already in motion, not a change of direction, but a deepening of one. What makes this worth carrying into the night is less the number itself than what it represents. A small nation receiving support from a larger collective and putting it to use in a place where the margin between calm and concern has always been thin. The forests and coastlines of Estonia will look no different tomorrow. But underneath, something has shifted, a little more weight given to readiness, a little more shared responsibility made concrete. And in Tallinn, where the old walls still stand, that is understood for exactly what it is. In Italy, recycling isn't treated as a burden or a virtue signal. It's just something people do, woven into the rhythm of daily life. The headline from Clean Technica points to something many travelers notice but few countries have managed to replicate. Italy has figured out how to make recycling genuinely easy. Not easy in theory, but easy in the way that matters, at the kitchen counter, at the corner cafe, in the small choices of an ordinary afternoon. Plastic bottle tops, for instance, don't just get tossed, they get collected often by school children or community groups and turned into something useful. And composting bags, the kind that makes separating food waste feel less like a chore and more like a habit, are part of the everyday landscape in many Italian towns. The details beyond that are thin tonight, but the shape of the story is clear enough. Italy has long lived close to its land, its farms, its food. Perhaps it's no surprise that a culture so attentive to what goes on the plate would also be attentive to what comes off it, and where it goes next. What stands out is the tone. There's no grand campaign, no sense of sacrifice, just practical human-scale solutions that meet people where they are. And maybe that's the quiet lesson, that the best environmental habits aren't the ones that ask the most of you. They're the ones that fit so naturally into your day you barely notice them. If you're still with me, hold that thought as we move along. Sudan has been living with war for a long while now, and the lines drawn across the country have a way of shifting when you least expect it. This week, one of those shifts came not on a battlefield but in the quiet matter of allegiance. A governor aligned with the Rapid Support Forces, the paramilitary group that has been fighting the Sudanese army, left that side and crossed over to the army instead. It is the kind of move that sounds simple in a headline but carries enormous weight for the people caught in between. The war itself did not pause to take notice. In Al Obeid, a city in the heart of the country, the RSF renewed its assault. Drones struck the capital, Khartoum. Farther east, near the border with Ethiopia, forces pressed toward a key town, and around Kurmuk, the army says it repelled coordinated attacks. Each of these names is a place where families live, where children should be sleeping, where the ordinary rhythm of life has been replaced by something no one would choose. The ripple of this conflict reaches well beyond Sudan's borders. Families have fled to Chad, to South Sudan, carrying what they can. Aid organizations are working to shelter and protect the young ones among them. A governor changing sides will not end this war, but it is a reminder that even within the machinery of conflict, people make choices, and sometimes those choices turn them in a different direction. For Sudan tonight, that is the story, one turn among many, in a country still waiting for the road home. Mozambique sits on some of the largest natural gas reserves ever found off the African continent, and for years the country has waited to see what that might mean. Off the northern coast, in the Rovuma Basin beneath the Indian Ocean, ExxonMobil has been steadily advancing a project valued at around $20 billion. The plan is moving toward a final investment decision, with expectations it could come by the end of the year or into 2026. That phrase, final investment decision, sounds technical, and it is. But in practice, it is the moment a project of this scale stops being a possibility on paper and becomes a commitment of steel, labor, and capital. For Mozambique, the stakes are considerable. Gas wealth has long held the promise of transformation, new revenue, new infrastructure, new jobs in a country where many still live without reliable electricity. But that promise is complicated. The northern province of Cabo Delgado, where the gas lies, has also seen years of instability and displacement. The question has never been simply whether the gas can be extracted, but whether the benefits will reach the communities living nearest to it. ExxonMobil's progress suggests that momentum is building again after years of delay. What shape it takes, how carefully, how equitably will unfold over the coming months. For now, the rigs and the plans are there, and the country is watching what comes next. If you're still with me, we'll move along. In Slovakia, a quiet but significant milestone has been reached. The country's newest nuclear reactor has achieved what engineers call criticality, the moment when a sustained nuclear chain reaction begins inside the core. It sounds dramatic, but in practice, it's a careful, deliberate step. Nothing explodes, nothing visible changes. It simply means the reactor is alive, in a sense, producing heat, and with it, the promise of electricity for the grid. For Slovakia, a country that has long relied on nuclear power to keep its homes lit and its industries running through cold Central European winters, this is a story about continuity. About finishing something that was started years ago through political changes and economic shifts and all the ordinary delays that large infrastructure projects tend to accumulate. Criticality is not the finish line. There are still tests ahead, connections to the grid, power ramps, safety checks, before the reactor delivers its first kilowatt to a household in Bratislava or a factory in Košice. But it is the moment when the project stops being purely theoretical and becomes quietly real. If you think about it, there's something deeply patient about nuclear engineering. Years of construction, tons of concrete and steel, thousands of people across dozens of disciplines, all of it converging on a single invisible instant when the atoms begin their work. No fanfare, no fireworks. Just readings on instruments and a room full of engineers watching carefully. Slovakia has been here before with earlier reactors. They know the rhythm. And so this week, somewhere in that small landlocked country at the heart of Europe, a new source of warmth hums to life and waits to be useful. Belize is a small country on the Caribbean coast of Central America, and for a long time its courts have operated much the way courts everywhere once did, through paper, counters, and waiting rooms. This week, the Magistracy of Belize launched its first official website, built to give people a straightforward way to reach the justice system without having to show up in person just to ask a basic question. It's a quiet kind of progress, the sort that doesn't make much noise but changes the texture of daily life for people who need it. If you live in a district town far from the courthouse, or if you work through the week and can't afford to lose a day standing in a queue, a website might be the difference between engaging with the system and giving up on it. The magistracy handles the cases closest to ordinary life, minor offenses, family matters, preliminary hearings, so making that front door easier to find matters in a practical, everyday way. There's no grand claim being made here. No suggestion that a website fixes everything that's slow or strained in a court system, but it does something real. It says, here's where we are, here's what you need to know, and you don't have to come to us first to find out. In a country where communities are spread along coastlines and inland roads, that openness counts for something. And if you're still with me, you might picture someone tonight, sitting at a kitchen table with a phone, finding an answer they couldn't find before, and feeling perhaps a little less far from where justice lives. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.